Cheers. My name is Emmanuel Wa-Kyendo, and I want to go over what budget priorities representatives from different sectors of Kenya, both civic society and the private sector, want from the next budget. Now, this is certainly not an exhaustive list of all of all the sectors. Neither does it fully represent every sector and every sector's desires for the next budget, but it gives us a taste of what is going on and what the people in these different sectors are actually seeing and experiencing, and then by extension, sort of what Kenya looks like right now. So the sectors in question, we have the education sector, the banking sector, agriculture, manufacturing, and ICT. In all, these sectors all are concerned about the cost on the supply side, the cost of production. The cost of production is being influenced negatively by the general state of Kenya's the macroeconomic environment. Then you have the tax rates, and the whole tax regime itself that is targeting a small base of taxpayers and is very, very high. It's heavy, and it's also difficult to administer because it's very complex. Then you have on top of that the excessive regulations, right? Pharmaceutical sector is one. They're an example. I mean, you just have, I think, the number of regulations you have to meet and certificates you have to maintain in every year, almost 100. So that's overall. Now, specifically, the education sector is represented by Usawa Agenda at this pre-budget hearing hosted by the Institute of Economic Affairs. They presented 4 proposals. They think the priorities should be to accelerate investments in school infrastructure, close the digital divide in education, and strengthen teacher capacity and professional development, and then also enhance monitoring, accountability, and coordination. Now, these are all, it could almost be like typical, like almost like if you generated this off, ChatGPT. I'm aware of that. So, put more succinctly, what the education sector is facing is this. Poorer schools are extremely inadequately equipped. I'll go over some of the data in the next video. But for now, they're inadequately equipped. The poorer the school, they don't have enough, say, chemistry labs, science labs, right? ICT labs. So, and then resources like special needs education, right? So, you could say, perhaps one argument is that we need to figure out what is the baseline for high quality delivery of education, and then ensure that schools meet that baseline, but then without trying to correct for every single inequality. That's a counterweight. And you could think about that. Think about what is actually viable. At the same time, we have to be very careful and very cognizant of what it means to build a society where access to education is not extremely lopsided, so that the poorer you are, the higher the barriers. So we should be trying to lower the barriers. That's in principle. I'm sure the Constitution has a lot to say about that. The Kenya Bankers Association. Now, with the thematic thrust, the Kenya should restore the purchasing power for Kenyans and businesses, right, for households and businesses. Proposals by the Kenya Bankers Association were namely to increase production, increase Kenyan exports, increase the Kenyan public's confidence and trust in government, enhance the growth of Kenyan MSMEs, increase local investment in productive economy, and spur economic vibrancy in order to raise the taxes collected. Now, you can see that they framed everything in terms of, hey, if all these things happen, you, the government that want taxes, you're going to get taxes. That's how they chose to frame it. I would disagree with that kind of framing. In the sense that you don't need to state that a certain proposal will raise taxes in order. It's not the highest justification, right? The Kenya Bankers Association estimates that these aims will result in a country whose political and economic environment had stabilized ahead of the general election. So their other concern was that when you're approaching the election nearing period, while all of a sudden you have a slowdown in economic activity, which is a negative for the banks, right, and their business. Now, the agriculture sector, policy recommendations for the agricultural sector were 5, namely the strengthening of public expenditure, the expansion of public-private partnerships for irrigation, storage, and processing, the creation of conditional grants for counties, the improvement of subsidy targeting and leveraging of private input distribution, and the protection of development spending at the national and county levels. What they're essentially saying is they want the government to look around and find the bottlenecks and subsidize in such a way that they improve the productivity of the agricultural sector, and that where possible, use the private sector, use existing firms to carry out your subsidy programs. That's what I understood. And don't create parallel programs that cut out, there could be a business, say, that could provide something that the government thinks they need more of. And then now you might have heard about the Cotonou, I think it's a Cotonou agreement, the agreement that agriculture, that African countries should spend, or is it countries of the world should spend at least 10% of their budget on agriculture. This is part of their argument. The agriculture sector was saying that not only are the allocations to agriculture development shrinking in real terms, but that we're not meeting the requirements of that agreement. Now, the pushback might be, who said that some arbitrary number of 10% is what you need, right? Is that the best way? It sounds more like a political disagreement between nations, that there's a certain amount you should spend, than one based on your needs, the needs of your agriculture sector, whatever country you are, and an assessment of those needs and an allocation. So that's, allocation in accordance with those needs. So that's the pushback. Now, for the manufacturing sector, the Kenya Association for Manufacturers recommended that the 2026-27 budget should include lowered rates for raw materials and intermediate products, a review of citizen tax income to enhance the cost of living and purchasing power, the identification and support for specific subsectors like food and beverage production, pharmaceuticals, and the creation of a conducive business environment, the establishment of a predictable tax regime to avoid investor uncertainty, the lowering of regulatory burdens by national and county governments, fiscal discipline and debt management, and the managing of domestic debt accrual to avoid crowding out of the private sector. These sort of explain themselves, but the essence again is that manufacturers are actually leaving Kenya. So the ask there is, do what you can to lower these costs, or we're going to keep leaving. Now, finally, the ICT sector. Proposals for Kenya's ICT sector were directed at 4 problems, namely connectivity, cybersecurity, cloud adoption, and AI innovation. Proposed interventions for each of these problems were the ring fencing of budgets for the rollout of 4G connections in Kenya's rural areas, the increase of allocations for cybersecurity, fiscal incentives to drive the local adoption of cloud computing server platforms, and an AI innovation fund. So what then are we supposed to make of all this? So starting with manufacturing, the manufacturing sectors, like the underperformance is a concern because, and we've repeated this many times on this channel. It's a truism. It's an agreed upon, like an empirical reality, right, in the world of economics, that it is the manufacturing sector that can deliver the greatest welfare gains in the shortest amount of time to the widest number of people. And so you want to do everything to make sure that this sector is growing. And so if we're in a state where, look, remember the context, Vision 2030. Kenya was supposed to be something approaching an advanced economy by the year 2030, and there were different measures that were to be taken by the state, to ensure that happened. Right now, one of the results that you want, right, is to have a manufacturing sector that contributes that makes a contribution to GDP that is somewhere between 15 and 25% in that 30 years, at least above 20%, because it's healthy. You can think of it almost like muscle density or something. That's a light metaphor to say, like, what does it actually mean for a country to have manufacturing to GDP? And what that is saying is that 25% of your economic activity. So if Kenya's GDP is 123 billion, 25% of that should be from manufacturing. Kenya is at about 8%. Not only is it at 8%, but there are signs that Kenya is actually deindustrializing prematurely. That is bad news. If we are in the year 2025 and we're supposed to be at 25% by the year 2030, in 5 years. Now, if we were to actually meet that, you would need to airdrop, you would need to put up hundreds of factories overnight, right, for that to happen. So it's a dire situation, and when members of parliament themselves can admit the Kenyan factories are actually moving to places like Rwanda, to other countries in the region because Kenya is uncompetitive, well, there you go. And there's many ways that this uncompetitiveness has expressed itself. One of them you could look up. It's called the real effective exchange rate. It's just another number saying that Kenya's goods are getting so expensive for its consumers abroad that they would rather compared to our neighbors. So our neighbors, their goods are actually getting cheaper for their perennial customers, while ours are getting more expensive. It's a sign that we are losing our competitive edge, because essentially our goods, if you're getting more competitive, one of the effects is that your goods are of a higher quality and they're also of a lower price than they were before. And you're producing more and more complex, very sophisticated goods. Now, because this is not happening, it tells us that there's something wrong with Kenya's the policies, the environment that Kenyan manufacturers actually face. Now, you can take that and actually stretch it out and see how in different ways it issues for all these other different subsectors. And that is the end of that. Thank you.